Hello, BookTube. I've got a Friday reads for you on this very cloudy, overcast Friday. Looks like it might spit rain or sleet for an hour or two at some point today. And then the weather's going hyperventilatingly nuts about the weather tomorrow, where the temperature will plunge and the wind will increase. There'll be huge gusts of wind, so everybody's worried about power going out. Could go out here. And then back to normal. Then right back to normal. So, I've got some Friday reads for you, some books that I have read, some books that I haven't read. I was realizing when I was making artwork for you, I was getting pictures together so that I wouldn't just be nattering on about books. I was realizing as I was doing that this could be much longer. This could be just a rambling discussion about everything that I've read or I plan to read in the right now in this focus. That's what I'm kind of looking at these Friday reads as, sort of records, sort of the talkative egomaniacs version of Goodreads. But we'll go through them and just see. Maybe some of them will be interesting to you. The first one is Bruce Clark's book, Athens, City of Wisdom. I believe this is out already. It's a really, really good new history of Athens. Not just the 4th century BC that everybody knows, but all the rest of it as well. It follows the city all the way to the present day. There's been a few books like that in recent years, and this is just wonderful among them. Big, hefty thing in the hands. So if you're interested in the city of Athens and the way that a city works its way through history, you definitely want to get this book. It's not so much for you if you're only interested in ancient Athens. That probably won't do it for you, because there's a lot here that isn't about ancient Athens. For that, you probably want Bethany Hugh's book, The Hemlock Cup, or Christian Meyer's book called Athens, that is just about classical Athens. But this, if you're looking for the broader picture, oh boy, this is terrific. Then we have, this is Alessandro Barbaro. This is a new biography of Dante by the Italian novelist that I haven't read yet. I think this was just recently translated into English, or at least the English language translation was just recently brought to America. I'm looking forward to it. I've read a lot of biographies of Dante, and never read one yet that really did it for me. The closest one was, I think it was called Dante and His World. It was by a scholar whose last name was Chubb, Chubb, from, must have been decades ago, 50, 60 years ago. I love that book. If I saw that again, I would get it. That had the real feel of the era. Usually, biographies of Dante just make me go back to the Commedia or to the Vita Nuova. They usually don't satisfy me on their own. Whereas a really good biography of Isaac Newton will not send me back to the Principia. But this next one is a huge YA novel. This is House of Sky and Breath, a Crescent City novel by Sarah J. Maas. This is the follow-up to her the first Crescent City book, which was a big red brick that I reviewed. I actually liked it. I enjoyed it. It had massive flaws. Those of you who don't typically read YA are going to notice those flaws right away, because Sarah J. Maas is, of course, a squintillionaire because of indulging in the flaws of YA. So she's hardly going to abandon them now. If I remember, I'll leave a link to my review down below. I was wondering, based on the reviews or further contemplation, whether or not this book would be any different from the first one. Because the most notable thing about the first one is that both the author and her publisher engaged in a bald-faced lie of calling the first book her first adult novel and not YA, when her first book was YA right down to its DNA. And this thing even has the YA title, The Something of Something and Something. Right? That is absolutely required for YA books. The Something of Something and Something. You can't call it anything else. The title has to be that way, and that's this. The same thing is true here. All of the gimmick. This was also full of energy. A really good continuation of the first book, but at least maybe it's me, but I'm not hearing this being called, Sarah J. Maas's second adult novel. It is certainly not. This is just pull out all the stops YA. It's YA with more expletives. That's all. That doesn't make it an adult novel. that doesn't change its fundamental DNA at all. And as a side note, those of you who might be considering this as a series, you'd want to start with the first book, definitely. You don't want to read this one first. But you also want to be aware of those expletives, because they're they're littered like sprinkles on every page. No character ever speaks without dropping F-bombs. So you have to be prepared for that. That's all. Because if that's going to ruin your reading experience, then it certainly will. It doesn't necessarily ruin my reading experience, except when it's so exorbitant, as in that first book. It's a little more tame in the second book here, and some of the action sequences are better. But then this next one is by Ashton Newbold, and it is the latest book in a series that I caught on to because of Kindle. This is happening more and more. This is just a changing feature in my reading landscape. I caught on to this series. I became aware of it. It's self-published. I became aware of it because for all the evils of Amazon, for all the requisite bashing that we have to do of Amazon, they do a huge amount to promote new authors. And I am a good example of how that works because I don't go looking for them. I have, as you know, a steady stream of mainstream books coming to me. I'm in less of a market to find new independently published authors than most other people are. Most people subscribe to something like Kindle Unlimited or keep an eye out for Kindle deals, free or a 99-cent book, because books are enormously expensive and they want to feed their reading habit, and the library has waiting lists and books are enormously expensive. So they go online to places like Amazon in order to get tons and tons of books for a lot less money. I'm not in that position. So I would never know about these things if it weren't that Amazon was constantly putting them in front of me. And I'll read them, of course. I'll read them, as my old friend Deb will tell you. I'll read anything. I'll read them, and every once in a while I will read one that does that thing that I'm always talking about, that snap, where you're reading it, you suddenly realize, oh, okay, this author is actually present. This author is not talentless, and they're not phoning it in. I'm getting a real reading experience here, regardless of where I'm getting it. I don't care where I'm getting it from. I'm getting a real reading experience. That's what hooked me on this series. It's Regency romances. So maybe I was more inclined, although sometimes I get hooked on series or authors or whatnot, even when I'm not, based just on the writing. This is The Matchmaker's Request. Very nice, stately cover there. I think this is book 4 or 5 in the series. I don't know that I've read them all, but every one of the ones that I've read, I've enjoyed. So, and I read a lot of romance novels. I read a lot of Regency romance novels, and these are well done. This next one will be familiar to quite a few of you. This is The Murder of Roger Ackroyd by Agatha Christie. This is an Hercule Poirot mystery where he exercises his little gray cells, and The Murder of Roger Ackroyd fell into common domain. It fell into the public domain in 2022, which means that you don't have to be part of or have permission from Agatha Christie's literary estate in order to reprint this book. You could make a reprint of it yourself if you wanted to. It's in the public domain now. It is up for grabs. And the one sure thing that results from that is that you'll get 1 million new editions of the work. I got 4 or 5 editions of The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, either via ebook or in the mail. And I took the occasion, as I did with Ernest Hemingway, as I did with Virginia Woolf. I'm going to do this regularly. I do this regularly. I often praise it regularly on this channel and also in print. That one of the things I love about my job is that it does not restrict me just to new releases. Plenty of time, reprints are also new releases. We saw those David Brandstetter novels. Who would have thought that somebody at Soho Press would reprint those books? Those groundbreaking gay PI novels by Joe Hansen. Who would have thought? And yet there they are. The new book market routinely supplies the itch for old books. If I didn't love the people at the Brattle Bookshop, that would probably decrease my visits to any kind of used bookstore. And this is another perfect example. I now have multiple ebooks of The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. So I reread it to see what all the fuss is about. Because The Murder of Roger Ackroyd really, really put Agatha Christie on the map. And it's really well done. It really is well done. The more you reread Agatha Christie, the more her shortcomings as an author stick out. Heavy reliance, heavier than you remember, on slang, on period idiom, so that you sort of have to get into the frame of things, or more likely, you have to go into these things having seen them adapted without that slang for TV or movies. Because that's the first thing that the writer of an adaptation will take out. They'll take out the slang and put in more contemporary language or just neutral language. But there's that, and there are a couple of other things as well. A couple of other, as I mentioned about Agatha Christie on this channel a couple of times. She's mean. She's a mean author. She does not like her characters. I would argue that she doesn't even like her two most famous protagonists, Miss Marple and Hercule Poirot. I would argue that it's pretty clear that she doesn't like them either, but especially her other characters, which you're going to get a lot of, especially in an Hercule Poirot mystery. There'll be whole novels where he doesn't show up until the end, or barely shows up at all. You're going to get all the other characters, and boy, oh boy, she's mean. She doesn't like her characters. She holds them to an impossible standard of morals and behavior, and then bashes them around. Once you're reading these books and paying attention, you see that she's bashing around her own characters subtly all throughout every book. Now, I shouldn't pose that as a negative. That's actually kind of thrilling, especially since she does it really well. One of the things that strikes you when you reread Agatha Christie, and you can reread The Murder of Roger Ackroyd in 2022 for free, one of the things that strikes you really vividly is that she really knows how to pound together a story. Absolutely she does. It makes me dream of a major reprint house, Penguin Classics, for instance, reprinting her as her books come into the public domain. That would be incredible. That would be incredible. Penguin reprints for their Penguin Classic line a whole bunch of titles that aren't any good literarily, that are there for significance or social or historical significance, or because they were immensely popular with readers and are just within Penguin's reach to reprint without paying an estate. Well, Agatha Christie fits all of those bills. She can sometimes be a very perceptive and interesting writer. She never really rises to the level of literature, but she's not junk. And she's immensely interesting for social and historical reasons, immensely into the world's best-selling author. But anyway, I reread The Murder of Roger Ackroyd and loved it. And I also love the fact that because I've read such a blizzard of Agatha Christie, not just Marple and Poirot, but all the rest of it as well. I have millions of her on ebook. I had semi-forgotten the twist at the end of The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. I had semi-forgotten it. It blurred with a couple of other twists at the end of Agatha Christie's story. She's really good with twists at the end of stories. And the twist is usually structurally different from other twists. That there's a lot of care and attention put into those. So, but they do blur together, and so I had the extra surprise of ooh. But then, right, this next one is Jane Ridley. We've seen it on this channel. This is George V. Never a Dull Moment. This is her big new biography of King George V. I reviewed this for Big Canoe News in Northern Georgia. There's a small monthly full color newspaper in Northern Georgia. I am the paid book section editor, not arts and entertainment, not movies, not the local bijou running the Maltese Falcon or the local dance company. I just do books. I have a 2-page spread of new books. And I reviewed this book. I was originally just going to pass on it. But then I thought, well, you have your own book section. You are the editor. And you never let a Windsor book go. So why review it anywhere else? Why batten down the doors of some other editor who may or may not be interested when you are interested? Surely you could do it yourself. So I did. A friend of mine who's been watching my career at Big Canoe News said, well, that is something that people will go to find. You writing about the Windsors is something that people will go to find. The others, maybe not. The other things that you cover, maybe not. But that, yes, you've been doing that for 15 years. I hadn't thought of it that way, but nevertheless, if you want my review of this book, that's the way to do it. But Big Canoe doesn't paywall their material. You can subscribe to the paper. If you subscribe to the paper, I think it's $35 a year, you'll get that big paper delivered on your doorstep at the beginning of every month. And in the back of the news section is 2 full pages of books coverage. So that way you'd have the print version, which is lovely. The graphic design people at Big Canoe they do such an amazing job. It looks better than any other paper in the Deep South. But they don't paywall their material. So you could find my review online. This next one, I think we may have seen it on this channel. It's by Lucy Foley, and it is The Paris Apartment. This was a kind of contemporary thriller of a type that I usually find very bare bones, just not really much there. Maybe not the author's fault. There were several times in the course of this book, for instance, where I got the impression that Lucy Foley probably wanted this to have more bells and whistles than it did. Maybe it started out that way and just got pared away by editors who were looking to create, the Woman Next Door or Girl on a Train or something like that. This is the story of a down and out woman who hits rock bottom, has almost nothing, and gets a lifeline from her brother to come and stay in his Paris apartment until she can get her life straightened out, get her feet underneath her. And she gets to the apartment and notices two things right away. One is that the apartment seems a lot more elaborate than her brother could realistically afford. And the second thing is that her brother's not there. But everybody else in the building is there, and they all have stories of their own, and it starts to be a wonderful kind of whodunit matched with a where are they. It ended up hitting all the right notes. My one note of frustration with it is I got the impression that it could have been more of a book than it was, if that makes any sense. It seemed to be boiled down to the soup-strained essences of an airport thriller. In a way, most airport thrillers seem to be built up to that. They seem to have very little to do other than that. This one struck me could have been more textured if maybe it hadn't had so many meddling hands. I mean, I could be completely wrong about that. This next one is Elizabeth George. I've talked about her before. I think I've showed you this book before. This is Something to Hide, an Chief Inspector Linley novel that centers on the immigrant experience in London. There's always a theme. There's always, in addition to the murders and to the detection, there's always a kind of a thing, a social thing going on in the background somehow. And this is about Nigerian immigrants, the Nigerian immigrant experience in some parts of London, and the way that Nigerian immigrants can be preyed upon by, for instance, the medical establishment, as in this book, where the doctor in this book is just approached on the street by a Nigerian immigrant who needs a procedure done and has no phone, has no health insurance, no health care, is not maybe even a legal resident. So they just have to pay money, which puts them completely at the mercy of, for instance, a mercenary doctor. And you might think, okay, well, then that's a narrative that's just going to portray the Nigerian immigrants as, put upon saints. But no, they're not the good guys either, because especially since one of the procedures that they want to pay for is horrifying. Instead, what I noticed about this book is, Elizabeth George has some hits and misses. I just reread Just One Evil Act, and it was just as bad as it was the first time that I read it, and just as bad as all the fans of the Linley novels have said that it was. This one was much, much better. Elizabeth George, when you strip it all down, apart from the satisfactory nature of the mystery or whether or not the investigation part is handled well, she's just such a good writer that I'm on board for almost anything that she does, and she has such a talent for infusing her scenes with life. For her, there really doesn't seem to me to be a kind of tunnel scene that's there mainly to get you from A to B. There really don't seem to be scenes like that. Instead, there's just so much texture. Eye-opening. I really, really enjoyed it. Okay, this next one is the biggest literary release of the month, probably of this part of the year, and I wish I could report that I liked it more than I did. It's To Paradise by Hanya Yanagihara, who every one of you will have read A Little Life and have their opinions on it one way or another. So do I. This is a reality sandwich. This is the book is in 3 parts, and the first part is historical, and then there's a part that's contemporary, and then there's a part that's in the future. And on one level, there's obviously a meta commentary going on here on how we really cannot construct other time periods, because the past is fantastical. It isn't. There's no attempt made to make it a transcription one-to-one with what we know the past was like. And the future, of course, any future extraction is fantastical. To me, it didn't seem to work. To me, the meta commentary of the author throughout this book seemed to be so intrusively heavy-handed. Not just that part about how we have to imagine any period except our own. So why not imagine it? Why not go whole hog? Why not rewrite what it is? If I'm going to write you projected future 50 years or 60 or 100 years in the future, well, if you're going to take that kind of fantasy from me and read it as writ, then why can't I rewrite the past as well? Not only that meta commentary, which gets a little tiresome because it's the sort of thing you're supposed to sort out in your sophomore year dorm floor room, but also the meta commentary of how I the author, Hanya Yanagihara, I am making all of this up. I, the author, am moving all of these chess pieces around. I can't think of any other reason, really, when you boil it down. I can't think of any other reason why the names would be the way they are in this novel. The names being similar or repeated or etched everywhere. If you're going to go to such ostentatious length not to give your characters distinguishable names, then you have to be commenting to your reader on some level about how they're just characters and about how you're moving them around like chess pieces. So the first reading that I had of this thing, once I went through the kabuki opera of getting a copy, the first reading that I went through of this thing was unsatisfying in a way that I'm not accustomed to with this author. I know from this author, from reading her other books, that a rereading may change my mind, may really open up avenues. I don't think so. I hate to say it about what I consider to be one of the major heavy hitter literary voices of our time, but I had the feeling over and over again in this novel of it being dashed off, of being written at speed and not edited. I don't like to think that. I don't, because we like to think that any Hanayahara book is a big deal, a literary event. And I love that feeling. And I love the fact that people love this author for that fact. So I hated having that feeling, but I got it over and over again while I was reading this thing. This just doesn't, there are parts of it that seem elaborately over thought out, and there are other parts of it that it seems like you're just writing whatever comes into your head. And I'm not fond of that, even with, indie authors, self-published indie authors no one's ever heard of. So one of the foremost literary names of our generation, I'm even less fond of it. So unfortunately, Two Paradise is on my list, but not with unalloyed praise. There were large chunks of it, of course, that were extremely effective. But when I think about A Little Life, the novel A Little Life, I think about the steely control of the thing. That was one of the appeals to me. One of the things that made it seem so weird for the 21st century, which is, in case you weren't aware, not exactly characterized by steely control. It's pretty hard to be an author exercising steely control over your narrative if you are spending literally 10 hours a day scrolling on Twitter. Literally. So you're awake for 11 hours. In that 11th hour, you are fixing your meals, you are guilt-tripping your loved one, and you're maybe writing a sentence or two of the book that you've been paid an elaborate amount of money to produce. But the other 10 hours, you are scrolling on Twitter. It's pretty tough to expect steely control from someone who's writing a book under those circumstances. But I got it with A Little Life, and it's nowhere to be found in Two Paradise. I didn't think. I will do this. As I mentioned, this author is an author that I go back to because I expect that a reread will change my mind. We'll see. This next one is by Nicholas Jackson, and I haven't read it. I am, to put it mildly, looking forward to it. It is a new biography of Trajan, the Roman Emperor Trajan. That is himself on the cover. And I have read every biography of Trajan that's ever been written in 4 different languages, going back a long time. I think he's fascinating. I wrote an unpublishable novel about him. And in the course of writing that novel, I did a huge amount of research. I even went so far as to subscribe to the Journal of Roman Studies, which was, at the time, well over $100 for one issue. You get one issue a year. But I thought I had to do it. And I did. I put the research library at the Boston Public Library to work, building the scaffolding for that novel, and came to be fascinated with Trajan. Most people don't know this emperor. The most contact that students, for instance, will ever have with him is that he is sometimes, for one book of Pliny's collected letters, he is Pliny's correspondent. Pliny saved and published his correspondence with the emperor. Most people only know Trajan from that, or from pictures of Trajan's column in Rome. But he was a fascinating figure. He was Spanish, so he was sort of nominated for the position of emperor by a canny old man named Nerva, who chose him even though he wasn't one of Rome's first families, wasn't born in Italy, and he was also he was a career military man, of course, and conducted wars throughout the whole time that he was emperor. Wasn't particularly literary, wasn't particularly polished, and yet managed to become beloved, absolutely beloved. Extended Rome's territory on land to the greatest extent of any Roman emperor, and was succeeded by Hadrian, who was also Spanish, so that it gave commentators and quip wags the ability to say that now a Roman emperor can be found elsewhere than Rome. A big change, and a foresager of things to come for the empire. He was revered. His memory was revered by the Romans. They used to say maybe as great as Augustus and as great as Trajan. And that reverence for his name and for his reputation extends even into the Middle Ages. Just look at where Dante puts Trajan in the Divine Comedy, and you will see it's not the usual place. It's not the place where someone like Nero would end up, or most famously Brutus and Cassius. I am looking forward to this. The only note of doubt that I have with it is that we don't have a lot to go on. Trajan wrote an autobiography, and he also had a few collected volumes of letters of his correspondence. We don't have any of them. Famously, we have one part of the first line of his autobiography, and that's all. You can find echoes of him everywhere else, but even finding the details of his warfare. He conducted 2 major wars in his reign, and even finding the details of those is really hard. I'll be interested to see what this author has to do. And then the last book that we'll do this time around is for the gays. You got to have something for the gays. Although, to put it mildly, Trajan was for the gays. If you're going to the the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, and you go to the Antiquities Wing and you're gazing long and hard at the statue of Trajan's wife, just know there ought to be air quotes around that word. Anyway, this is by B.A. Stretke. I think this may also have been a book that Kindle suggested to me. This is The Vampires of Savannah, The Vampire Throne, Volume 1. So it's not just vampires, but gay vampires in Savannah. And this is a kind of a Cinderella story, where the story revolves around a massively powerful, massively alpha Chad vampire who has been the lead military figure of his vampire clan for centuries, and who absolutely does not believe anymore in the myth that vampires can ever find true love with mortal beings. Until he walks into the wrong gay bar and spots the wrong guy. We've all been there, haven't we? And then all of a sudden, sparks fly. And I'm interested to see what the author will do with this story. It sounds a little bit preposterous. That's a preposterous cover, but just recently we lost Anne Rice, who I maintained with Interview with the Vampire, wrote the first gay romance of vampires. I don't think there's much doubt what's going on in that first book between Lestat and Lewis. I don't think there is. I'd be hard pressed to find a reader who could miss the subtext there. And that just keeps going throughout the Vampire Chronicles. But I'm not expecting the weird, fervid combination of literary joie de vivre and schlock that Anne Rice could bring together. She could hammer together stuff like that was just amazing. I still thrill to the reading experience of the second book in the Vampire Chronicles, The Vampire Lestat. I still thrill to that reading experience, entirely due to her writing. It would be unsalvageable schlock if it weren't for the way she wrote it. I'm not expecting that with this book, but I could be pleasantly surprised. You never know. That's one of the fun things that I like about the Kindle experience, about showing me these books, is that I don't know what I'm getting. I'll give them a try. There's always room for more in my reading wet cavalcade. But anyway, those are Friday reads for today. What is this? The 14th? 14th of January? Yeah, it has to be, because the last Friday reads was the 7th of January. See that? I'm pretty good. So that's my Friday reads for today. As usual with Friday reads, I'd love to know what you're reading, what you're contemplating reading. I will, of course, dutifully watch all the Friday reads that pop up on my BookTube feed. I love watching them. I love seeing what progress people are making, what dreams they have, that sort of thing. But anyway, that's mine for this week. I'll see you for our Friday reads next week. I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.